Philip wants to know, what are the pros and cons of the different bottom bracket standards like BB30, PF30, BB Right, etc.? The explosion of new bottom bracket standards in recent years has created headaches for mechanics everywhere. While all these standards were developed with the best of intentions, the implementation of many of them have been far from trouble-free. I'm just a mechanic, not an engineer, so I can't speak to the design benefits of each of the various standards, but I can tell you about my experiences with each of these. Before we jump into the much maligned new standards, I think it's important to take a look back at the challenges that the English bottom bracket faced, as this is the standard that all the new standards intended to improve upon. It was not uncommon to have to chase threads of an English bottom bracket shell and then face the shell in order to remove any excess paint and to ensure that the faces were square. These bottom brackets creak too, so before you go claiming that the English bottom bracket was perfect, remember that thousands of mechanics earn their living working on them. With that said, it's definitely the easiest standard to use from a mechanic's perspective, and is definitely the standard I prefer to work on all bikes. BB30 has largely gone away, and I'm happy about that. This standard used bearings that pressed directly into the frame that rested against a circlip that is fitted into internal grooves in the bottom bracket shell. The clips were weak and they creaked. If the bearing fit snug enough to stay put, it was usually over-compressed to the point where it didn't spin freely. If it spun freely, they usually ended up coming loose and created a creak. PF30 is an improvement on BB30 that utilizes a flanged cup for the bearing to sit in. That cup is then pressed into the frame. The cup helps to keep the bearing in place while preventing unwanted movement. The downside of this standard is that the aluminum crank spindle sits right on the steel inner bearing race, the same as BB30, which causes spindle wear and eventually leads to creaking. If the standard was meant to include a plastic sleeve like those found on English bottom brackets utilizing a 24mm spindle, it would be better in my opinion. Unfortunately, the worst part of the PF30 standard isn't the standard at all. It's the poor manufacturing tolerances the industry has used on bikes with this standard. Pressed-in headsets see way bigger loads applied to them, yet they still seem to fit right no matter how much the bike costs and almost never creak or come loose. There's no reason the industry couldn't do this with bottom brackets. BB Right is very similar to PF30 and uses the same bearings and cups, they are just spaced further apart. It never caught on in the industry and for some reason seems to suffer from the same crank wear issues and sloppy frame tolerance issues that PF30 does. BB86 and BB92 are the smaller diameter, wider space press fit standard. My experience is that these seem to work better than PF30 in spite of the fact they function in essentially the same way as PF30. I think this just proves my earlier point that maintaining tighter tolerances is the solution we need the industry to adopt. I don't have anything against adopting new standards for bottom brackets or any other component interface for that matter. I just think the industry needs to either commit to using tighter tolerances or standards that don't require such tight tolerances to work. A standard that also takes installation and removal tools and procedures into account would also be greatly appreciated. There's no need to ever use a hammer to remove or install anything on a carbon frame. Leave that stuff to the BMX world where it belongs. If you want your question asked on Ask a Mechanic presented by Cyclery, send your inquiry to webletters@competitorgroup.com.